friends, Miss Liz here. Okay, so today we're making broccoli cheese soup. This is one of my family's absolute favorites. It's super creamy and delicious. It's really popular at a couple of cafe restaurants. So if you've ever been out and had a broccoli cheese soup, this is very similar to that. It's really, really tasty, and it's really not hard once you get the steps down. So to start off with, you need a pot, obviously, for soup. I highly recommend using a food processor to shred your broccoli. You can chop it, it takes a little bit longer. I prefer to just throw it into my food processor. I use frozen broccoli in steam bags, and I'll steam them for like just 2 minutes or just let them sit and thaw a little. That way it's a little bit easier for me to pulse in the food processor, and then it's actually going to cook in the soup. So you can use fresh broccoli. It takes a little bit longer to cook, but it turns out really delicious too. I also prefer to buy Julien's shredded carrot pieces instead of slicing them myself. Again, because it's just a little bit easier, makes the process a little bit quicker. Whatever your preference is. If you have questions about ingredients, about recipe techniques, please feel free to message me or post them in the classroom, because if you have a question about it, the likelihood that a classmate has a question about it as well is pretty high. So feel free to post in the classroom. It's always great to share with your fellow classmates maybe what some of your confusion was, or if you have suggestions, if you've made a soup similar to this. Love to see those as well. So getting started, we're gonna take 4 tablespoons of butter, which is about half a stick, and we're gonna drop that into our pot, okay? Let me grab a knife really quick. All right, so we're just gonna take half a stick of butter and drop that into the pot. And I'm gonna turn that on to medium, okay? And as that melts down, I'm going to add my garlic. I'm using onion powder today. If you're using real diced onions, add that to the butter first. Let those become a little bit transparent, and then add your garlic. If you're using onion powder, then put the garlic in first, because that's the aromatic. And onion and garlic are both aromatics, which means that heat helps that flavor to release. So those need to be cooked a little bit before you start adding other ingredients to your soup. So I'm gonna let my butter melt down, and then I'm gonna add my garlic, and then I'm gonna sprinkle in my my flour to create a roux base, which is the paste that's going to thicken our soup, okay? So we're gonna let that butter melt down. Easy peasy. I prefer to use a wire whisk for soups because it's easier to make sure that the ingredients are dispersing. You can use a spoon or a spatula, whatever your preference is. My preference is just to use a whisk. If you're using a non-stick pan, make sure that your whisk is safe for that pan. It either has a rubber coating or it's silicone. Using a metal whisk inside of a non-stick pan is likely to scrape the finish off. So just be aware of what the finish is of your pan if you're using a wire or metal utensil in it, okay? Don't want anybody to ruin their mom or dad's pans. All right. All right, so butter is melting down here. I'm gonna go ahead and measure out my garlic. Minced garlic, we are doing, let's see here, 1 clove of minced garlic. So if you have garlic that's already minced like this in a jar, that's gonna be about half of a teaspoon. If you're mincing your own garlic, a bulb is that whole round piece, and one of those little sections that you pop off is going to be 1 clove. So you can definitely do that yourself. We use a lot of garlic in our house, and so I prefer to use jar minced garlic. You can usually find this in the produce section at your grocery store. Again, just makes things a little bit easier and a little bit quicker when you're trying to put dinner together. So half of a teaspoon, if you're using already minced garlic, will be 1 clove. Okay, so I'm just gonna whisk that around. Like I said, garlic is an aromatic, which means that the heat helps it release all of its flavors. But we only need to do that for a minute or two to get those flavors releasing as the butter starts to kind of bubble and the heat is being brought up. That garlic will start to release some of those flavors into the butter. And that's when we're gonna add our flour. We're gonna be adding 3 tablespoons of flour. If you're gluten-free or low carb, you can use xanthan gum. Xanthan gum works really great as a thickener as well. It's used a lot in gluten-free baking. And for that, it would be 1 teaspoon. But if you're using flour, it's gonna be 3 tablespoons. This creates a roux, which is a pasty textured consistency that we use anytime we're making a cream sauce. So if you're making a cheese-based soup or a cheese-based dip, or a white creamy sauce, such as like an Alfredo or something, you can thicken with a flour-based roux instead of using like a cream cheese to thicken. If you're making a creamy broth, maybe you're making a thicker, creamier gravy to put in like a chicken noodle soup and you want it to be a little thicker, you can make a roux base and then add your broth to it to thicken it up. So I'm gonna just give this a little stir before I add my flour. My garlic is starting to sizzle a little bit. I don't want to brown the garlic. I don't want it to become really dark, so I'm literally just letting it get a little bit bubbled so the flavor can release before I add that flour, okay? All right, so I'm gonna do 3 tablespoons of flour. And then I'm going to whisk this for a few minutes so that I can get the starchiness off of it. If you don't let flour cook long enough before you start adding things to it, it will taste very pasty flour-like. We don't want that. We want to remove that starchiness. So cooking it just a little bit longer before we add any of our liquids is going to eliminate that starchy taste. Okay? So I'm going to show you, it gets kind of goopy and sticky looking. That's what we want, okay? So we're just going to stir that for a bit. Just like that. Nice and sticky. Okay? All right, and so then into that, we're going to add the half and half and the chicken broth. And then I'm also gonna add some of my other spices. I'm gonna add that onion powder, the salt, and the pepper, okay? So onion powder is gonna be 1 tablespoon since I'm not doing a diced onion, and half a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper. All right. All right, so my roux base here is starting to sizzle, so I'm gonna add, I'm using half and half. This is my preferred texture. You can use regular milk. You can use heavy cream if you want a heavier texture, that's totally fine too. Grab my measuring cup here. And I'm gonna do 2 cups. I'm gonna whisk this in at the same time as I'm pouring. Whisking, whisking, whisking. You want to try to break up some of those clumps of the roux so that that roux kind of dissolves into the cream, a little bit at a time. So don't pour that whole thing in at once. We want to really whisk it together to eliminate the lumps of the roux. All right. Okay, so that's 2 cups of the half and half or cream or milk, whatever you're using. A good whisk. If at any time this is going too quickly and you need more time to measure, the beauty of a flex class is pause. Hit the pause button if you feel like you need a little bit more time. Pause and come back to it. No big deal, okay? None of these things have to be rushed. After you've made this recipe a few times though, you'll find that it does move fairly quickly once you're more familiar with the ingredients and what you're doing. So don't feel frantic, just pause, catch up, catch your breath, and keep going, okay? All right, so I have my half and half in there. I've whisked it really, really well so my roux has broken up. There's no clumps in there. I'm gonna go ahead and add my seasonings now before I add my chicken broth or vegetable broth. So I'm doing 1 tablespoon of onion powder. Okay, just like that. And then I'm gonna add half a teaspoon of salt. Just like that. And about half a teaspoon of pepper. I have a grinder, and so I just kind of estimate based on the number of turns I take. Okay, and then I'm gonna whisk those in really well. Just like that. All right. Now I'm gonna add 2 cups of broth, and you can use chicken broth, vegetable broth. You could use beef broth if you eat beef in your house. I prefer vegetable broth because we eat this as a vegetarian dish. It's whatever your preference is. So 2 cups of broth. Right in with that cream and roux, okay? So at this point, we have the bulk of our liquids in. We're gonna let those kind of warm up a little bit. And while those are warming up, we're gonna get our vegetables ready. So my broccoli is pretty soft, but it's not cooked. I've just kind of let it sit until I can feel that it's a little bit soft. I'm gonna pulse these in the food processor and then dump them in with my liquids in the pot. So again, I'm not steaming these. They're still cold. Might be some bits that are still frozen. That's okay. Just gonna pulse. Now, if you want to leave some bits of broccoli larger, you definitely can. I prefer to have smaller bits. I'm gonna scrape this out of my food processor. Like I said, if you don't have a food processor, you can chop by hand. You could also try using a blender. Sometimes a blender will get clogged though with something like broccoli. So it's whatever your preference is. I just find the food processor to be a little bit easier. All right, so there's my first bag. So now, depending on the size of your packages, I recommend 1 to 1.5 pounds of broccoli. Each of these packages of broccoli are 12 ounces, so I'm doing a total of 24 ounces, which is about 1.5 pounds. Okay. Put that right in with the broth. All right. So that's broccoli's nice and thick in there. You can see lots of broccoli in there, and that's gonna cook down some. All right, so we have our broth bases and the broccoli. Now I'm gonna put in my carrots, and then I'm gonna put in the rest of my spices. And then this is gonna simmer on the stove for like 30 minutes. And once that broccoli and carrots have gotten nice and soft, that's when I'm gonna add the cheese. We don't add the cheese until everything else has had a chance to break down. And the cheese, when we add that, we're just adding that and it'll melt down and be ready to eat. So once we add the cheese, it's pretty much done. So we're gonna add in the carrots. I'm doing about half of this bag. The carrots is kind of a preference. If you don't want carrots in there, you can totally leave them out. You can add more, you can add less. This is a 10-ounce package. I'm gonna add about half of this, and then I'm gonna save the rest for my salad. So these are already shredded, nice and thin. This is called julienne shredded. And I'm just gonna whisk that down in with the broccoli. Okay. And then I'm gonna add the last few spices here. So we're gonna add some ground mustard. Gives it just a light taste, half a teaspoon. Pull off this because it makes it easier to measure. Half a teaspoon of ground mustard. And then the really special ingredient in this is nutmeg. It gives it just a little bit of a kick, and it gives it a very distinct flavor. So in the ground nutmeg we're gonna add is just half a teaspoon again. Okay, and again I'm just gonna whisk those in. Oh, it smells good already. All right. Piece of broccoli stuck there. Okay. All right, so now we have pretty much everything added. I'm just double checking my recipe here. Perfect. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this down. Right now I have it on medium, but I'm gonna turn it down to medium low. If it starts to bubble, then I'm gonna turn it down just a little bit more, and I'm gonna let this simmer for about 20 to 30 minutes. 30 minutes if you're using fresh broccoli, 20 if you're using steamed usually. You just wanna make sure that when you pull it out, it's easily chopped up so that it's not crunchy when you're eating your soup. 30 minutes is usually a good amount for my family because we like it nice and soft. So I'm gonna cover this, turn it down to medium low, and come back in 30 minutes to do the cheese, and then we'll make our chef salad. Hi friends. Okay, so our soup is just about ready for cheese, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to make a simple chef salad. A chef salad is basically originated from restaurants or homes where the chef would kind of throw whatever they had on hand into a salad. So a chef salad usually is a basic lettuce base and then whatever vegetables, meats, and dairy the chef feels like adding to it. So at some restaurants, it's shredded cheese with turkey and ham, maybe a hard-boiled egg, bacon. So a chef salad can be however you interpret it, whatever you have on hand. So what I'm going to be doing, I have some basic iceberg here that's just ripped up. And I'm going to do just a shredded cheese blend. And I'm just going to sprinkle some of this shredded cheese. And as I mentioned before, do not put your hand down in a bag of cheese if you're not planning on using the whole bag, because we don't want to introduce bacteria and cause it to mold. I am going to put the rest of this cheese into my soup too. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle it all in there. I'm going to use some of these shredded carrots that we used from our salad, our soup earlier. Sprinkle those in as well. You can definitely do some diced tomatoes if you like. I'm going to toss in some bacon pieces. Some people like bacon bits, which are like the dried imitation. These are real bacon pieces. This is what my husband prefers. I'm going to sprinkle some of those in there. And then a chef salad, you usually serve the dressing on the side so people can choose what they like, whether it's ranch or a honey mustard or an Italian or a vinaigrette, poppy seed. Any of those are good with a chef salad. And I'm just going to take some deli meat here, and I'm just going to tear up some of these pieces and drop on there. You can also use like roasted chicken. You can shred it up on top, or ham, whatever your preference is. Just going to drop those down on there. Okay, just like that, okay? So that's a very basic chef salad. Like I said, you can add whatever you have on hand, make it your own chef salad. Diced tomatoes, diced peppers, croutons. We'll probably pair it with some ranch dressing. I also have some olives that I'll add to the side on each plate. So that's pretty basic, easy peasy. All right, so now for our soup, I'm gonna give this a little stir. My broccoli can definitely go a few more minutes if I want. It's gonna be a little bit firm still, but not crunchy, which is what we want. You don't want crunchy broccoli in your soup. A little bit firm, that's up to your family's preference. If you want it to be really soft, definitely let it go a little longer. I'm gonna go ahead and add my cheese, let the cheese melt down, and I'll let it continue to cook for maybe another 5 minutes or so, and that should be good. So we're adding 16 ounces, which is 1 pound of shredded cheddar cheese. Mild cheese, sharp cheese, whatever your preference is. We like mild at our house. I'm just gonna dump that whole 16-ounce bag right down into the pot. Okay? And then I'm just gonna kind of poke. The main reason that we use cheddar in this soup is because cheddar melts down very smooth. If you use a cheese more like a Colby or mozzarella, obviously mozzarella has a very distinct taste, but it also stretches. So you're more likely to get a stringy cheese soup if you're using a cheese like that. Now, initially melting, you will notice that the cheddar will string. But once it's completely melted down into the liquid, it'll become creamy instead of stringy, okay? So make sure you let that cheese cook down until it's no longer stringy and it's just nice and creamy in your soup. That's what we want, okay? I'm just gonna give it a few more good stirs, and then I'm gonna put the lid back on low, and just let it continue to simmer with the cheese in there. Oh yeah, good string there. So that'll melt down and won't be stringy here in a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of this bag of cheese as well, just because I have it on hand, and there's just a little bit left. Okay, give that a little stir. If your soup starts to bubble, turn the heat down, because we don't want to bubble our soup or it might start to separate. Okay, so I'm going to turn that down to low. Just keep an eye on it for a few more minutes. I have my salad ready to go once my soup is done, and that's it. Pretty simple. Your soup should take, by the time you're done with the ingredients and it's simmered, it's going to simmer for probably 30 minutes, and then you're looking at 10 to 15 minutes of prep work, so definitely less than an hour to make dinner, but it's super delicious and totally worth the wait. So hope you enjoy. If you have questions, feel free to post in the classroom, send me a message. Always happy to help, and I hope you enjoy your dinner.